At 93, Willie Nelson admitted that being the last highwayman left alive is just not funny. The legends who knew him best have spoken about his hardest years and his heaviest losses. Stay with me, because what his inner circle reveals about his final years shows the hidden cost of being the last of a dying generation. In April of 2026, Willie Nelson turned 93 years old. And when a man hits that age and keeps walking on stage, people start to ask a quiet question. What does a life that long actually cost him? The answer starts with the people who are no longer there. Willie was part of the Highwaymen. That group was 4 giants of country music standing shoulder to shoulder. 3 of those men are gone now. Willie is the only one still breathing. He once said, "The thought of being the last one left is just not funny." He did not say it for sympathy. He said it flat, like a fact he had already made peace with. But the names behind that sentence tell a heavier story. Waylon Jennings was the first to go. He died in 2002. Johnny Cash followed him a year later. For 2 decades after that, Willie carried the memory of both. He kept their songs alive on his own stage. He kept singing for the men who could not. Then came the loss that seemed to hit him hardest of all, and it was recent enough that fans watched it happen in real time. In 2024, Kristofferson died. He was the last of Willie's Highwaymen brothers. With him gone, Willie stood alone. Willie spoke about it openly. He called Chris a great friend and a great songwriter. Then he said 4 words that landed like a stone. That was a sad time. Coming from a man who rarely shows his pain, those 4 words said everything. But grief was not the only thing closing in on him. While the public mourned with him, another story was building. This one was about his body, not his heart, and it spread faster than any tribute. By 2026, the internet was full of warnings. Headlines pointed to his health. Many hinted that the end was near. Some of it had roots in truth. Willie's health history is long and real. To understand the worry, you have to understand what his lungs have already survived. For most of his life, Willie was a heavy smoker. Decades of it left him with emphysema, that is a serious lung disease that never fully goes away. He eventually quit tobacco. He turned to cannabis instead, which became a famous part of who he is, but the damage to his lungs was already done. So, every cough, every missed show, every rest order carried extra weight. For a singer, the lungs are the whole instrument, and his had been fighting for years. The trouble did not stop at emphysema. Willie has battled pneumonia more than once. He has dealt with breathing problems that forced him off the road. These were not new. Back in the 2010s, breathing issues pushed him to cancel dates. The pattern repeated again and again over the years. Each time, the same fear rippled through his fan base. Was this the moment the music finally stopped? And in 2026, that fear came roaring back. There were reports of cancellations and calls for rest. At 93, even a short illness sounds frightening to the people who love him. The story grew louder with every passing week. A missed show drew concern. A day of rest drew worried questions. And the people closest to him were watching it all unfold. What they wanted for him and what he wanted for himself were not the same thing. The reports said his family had begun urging caution. They wanted him to slow down. They wanted him to rest more and tour less. It was a reasonable wish. He had earned the right to stop. He had nothing left to prove to anyone. But Willie has never been a man who does the reasonable thing. And his answer to those pleas surprised even the people who knew him best. He kept going. He ignored the calls to slow down and stayed on the road. The breaks were short. Road always called him back to outsiders. This looked like a man racing the clock. A legend this old, this worn, refusing to rest. It fed the sense that time was running short. But Willie had a reason for pushing forward, and the reason had nothing to do with stubbornness or denial. For Willie, singing is not just a job, it is medicine. He has spoken about performing as a way to keep his lungs and his spirit strong. In his mind, stopping is the real danger. Sitting still is what kills men like him. The stage is where he stays alive. It is a bold way to live at 93. But that philosophy sat against a rising tide of worry that told a darker tale across social media. The mood turned grim. Videos warned of a health alert. Some spoke of a critical condition. Others pointed to statements from his family. The fear spread from screen to screen. Old photos resurfaced. Old tragedies were dragged back into the light. The volume was hard to ignore. When enough voices whisper the same fear, it starts to feel like fact. So where was all of it coming from? Part of it came from his real record of scares. This was a man who had cheated death before, more than once in ways most people never knew. He had survived a collapsed lung. He had survived a severe bout of COVID. He had survived years of breathing crises that would have ended a weaker man. So when the warnings spread in 2026, they did not feel like fiction. They felt like the latest chapter in a long fight. But the loudest fear was missing the deepest wound, because the heaviest weight on Willie at 93 was never really about his lungs. It was something quieter and far harder to film. The health scare was easy to talk about. It made for a frightening headline, but it was not the wound that cut the deepest. The real ache sat somewhere else. It lived in the empty spaces around him, in the chairs that used to be filled. And one of those losses cut deeper than the rest. For more than 60 years, Willie shared the stage with one person above all others. She was not just a bandmate, she was family in the truest sense. Her name will mean everything once you understand it. She was there before the fame, before the fall, before the world knew his name. When she was gone, something in his music changed forever, and he is spoken about, still feeling her beside him when he plays. That is the loss few of the headlines ever mentioned. It does not fit a quick scare video. It is too tender, too human, too slow to explain. The same is true of his children. Willie has buried more than one of them. That is a grief no parent should ever carry, let alone a man near 93. These were the real shadows over his birthday, not a cough, not a short rest, but a lifetime of goodbyes stacked one on top of another. So the picture starts to shift. The sadness of his life at 93 was never just about a frail old man fighting for breath. It was about a survivor surrounded by ghosts, a man who kept singing in rooms that used to be full of his people. That is a different kind of sad and a deeper one. But the strangest part of his story is not what life took from him. It is what he kept giving away even as it did. Because through every loss, Willie was pouring himself into a fight that was not even his own. While his own world kept shrinking, he was busy trying to save everyone else's. From the outside, it looked like pure generosity. Up close, it carried a cost few people ever saw, a weight he chose to lift year after year when no one would have blamed him for setting it down. So before we return to the empty chairs and the losses, we have to understand what Willie spent himself on and why it may have taken more from him than anyone realized. Go back to the year 1985. America's family farms were dying. Small farmers were losing land their families had worked for generations. The crisis was quiet, and almost no one in power seemed to care. Willie Nelson cared. He had grown up around farm country in Texas. He had picked cotton as a boy. He knew exactly what that land meant to the people who worked it, so he did something about it. Along with two other musicians, he founded an event that would become his life's great cause, and it would demand far more from him than anyone expected. The event was Farm Aid. Willie started it with John Mellencamp and Neil Young. The idea was simple. Gather musicians, hold a concert, and raise money for struggling family farmers. They thought it might take one show, one big night to wake the country up. They believed the problem could be solved quickly, if enough people just paid attention. They were wrong. The crisis did not go away, and what was meant to be a single concert became a burden Willie would carry for the rest of his life. One show became two. Two became many. Farm Aid did not end after a year or 10 years or even 30. It became an annual fight that never finished. Year after year, Willie returned to that stage. Decade after decade, he stood up for farmers while the problem refused to die. The cause he started in 1985 was still demanding his time in his 90s. Most men get to set their burdens down. Eventually, Willie picked his up and never let go. And by 2025, that fight reached a milestone almost no charity ever sees. Farm Aid marked its 40th anniversary in 2025. 40 years of concerts, 40 years of phone calls, planning, and standing on stages for a cause that paid him nothing, Across those 4 decades, the organization raised more than $90 million for family farmers. That is the scale of what Willie helped build, one show at a time. Think about what that means. For 40 years, while his own life filled with loss and illness, Willie kept showing up for strangers. That is, the part the headlines never measured. Now lay it against the timeline. You already know. The Farm Aid years were the same years his life kept caving in around him. In 1990, the IRS came for everything he owned. He was fighting bankruptcy and humiliation. And still, Farm Aid went on. He did not stop the cause. To save himself, in 1991, he buried his son, the deepest wound a parent can suffer. And still, the next Farm Aid came, and Willie was there for it. Picture the weight of that. A man losing his home to the government, mourning his own child, battling debts most people cannot imagine. And every year he climbs back on a stage to raise money for farmers he has never met. He could have walked away. No one would have blamed him. He had every reason in the world to focus on his own survival, but that was not who he was. The same boy who learned that music was a shelter grew into a man who tried to be a shelter for everyone else, even when his own roof was falling. In Farm Aid was not his only fight. Willie spent his life standing up for causes, often ones that made his life harder, not easier. He was never a man who chose the safe path. He became one of the most famous voices in America for marijuana legalization, long before it was accepted, long before it was legal. Willie spoke for it openly. That stance came at a price over the decades. It brought him arrests, headlines, and trouble with the law. He could have stayed quiet. He chose conviction instead. He was arrested more than once across the years for marijuana. Each time it made the news. Each time it could have damaged his career or his name. He never backed down to Willie. It was not about getting away with something. It was about honesty. He believed in the cause, so he lived it out loud, no matter what it cost him. That willingness to take the hit for what he believed ran through everything. It was the same spirit that turned a tax disaster into an album and a farm crisis into a 40-year mission. His convictions did not stop at farms or cannabis. Willie used his voice for cause after cause, often planting himself on the unpopular side of his own genre. Country music leaned conservative. Its audience often did too. And yet Willie spoke up for progressive causes, for the environment, for biodiesel fuel, for the rights of people who were often left out. He supported LGBT rights when many in his world stayed silent. He recorded songs and took stands that risked alienating part of his own fan base. He did it anyway. Every one of those stands carried a cost. Every time a star speaks against the grain of his audience, he risks losing. Some of them, Willie knew that and he accepted it. He had decided long ago that being true to himself mattered more than being safe. It was the same lesson from his outlaw days. Better to be free than to be liked by everyone. So he kept speaking, kept giving, kept fighting for causes that drained his time and tested his fans, all while his own private world kept narrowing with grief and age. And here's what makes this chapter ache. The more you look at it, the more it seems like a man giving himself away faster than life could refill him. He gave to the farmers. He gave to his causes. He gave to the fans who bought his memories back from the IRS. He gave on stages for 40 years while burying the people he loved most. A person can only pour out so much before the well runs low. By his 90s, with his lungs failing and his loved ones gone, the question became impossible to ignore. How much was left for Willie himself? That is the shadow over this part of his story. Not a villain, not a scandal, just a man who spent his whole life caring for others and may have had too little left over for his own rest. The fans saw the generosity, they saw the concerts and the causes and the smiling old outlaw raising millions. What they did not always see was the toll of carrying so much for so long. By 2026, that toll seemed to be coming due because a body can only give so much before it begins to break down, and Willie's body had been quietly breaking for a very long time. For all the grief and all the giving, there was one battle that never made the headlines the way it should have: the battle inside his own body. The lungs that carried his voice had been failing for decades. The breath that powered every song had grown thin and unreliable, and more than once, that failing body had nearly ended everything. The public knew about the cancellations, they knew about the rumors. What they did not fully know was how many times Willie Nelson had already come within inches of the end. Because long before 2026, the music had nearly stopped for good. Not once, not twice, but again and again across the years in ways most fans never heard about. There was a collapsed lung, there was a brush with a virus that kills men far younger than him. There were treatments and surgeries and nights when his own breath turned against him. This is the part of the story the rumors only scratched. The real history of Willie's body and how many times it tried to quit on him is darker and closer than anyone realized. And that is where we go next, the body that kept quitting. The trouble with Willie's body started long before old age, go all the way back to 1981. Willie was still in his 40s, still in his prime, still at the height of his powers, and then his lung collapsed. Not from age, not from a slow decline. A sudden, dangerous failure of the very organ a singer cannot live without. A collapsed lung is a frightening, life-threatening event. For most people, it is a crisis. For a man whose entire living depends on his breath, it was a warning shot he would never fully escape. He recovered, the way he always would. He got back up, got back on stage and kept singing, but the message was clear. Even then, his lungs were a weak point and they would only grow weaker. This was decades before the health scares of his 90s, decades before the rumors. The truth is that Willie's breathing had been a battle for most of his adult life, and the thing that made it worse was a habit he could not shake for years. The same habit that gave his voice its character was slowly destroying the instrument behind it. For most of his life, Willie was a heavy smoker. Cigarettes were constant companions through the long years on the road, and they took a heavy toll. The smoking left him with emphysema. It is a serious lung disease, and it does not heal. Once the damage is done, it stays done. The lungs simply cannot do what they once could for a singer. This is a slow tightening of the noose. Every year, a little less air. Every year, a little harder to push out the notes. Willie was singing against a clock his own habit had set. Eventually, he made the change that may have saved his life. He gave up tobacco. He walked away from the cigarettes that were strangling his lungs. In their place came cannabis, which became part of his legend and, in his view, easier on his body than the smoke that came before. It was his way of managing a problem that could not be cured, but quitting did not undo the damage. The emphysema remained. The weakened lungs remained. And on top of that disease, his body kept finding new ways to attack itself. Pneumonia became a recurring enemy. Willie battled it more than once over the years. For a man with emphysema, pneumonia is not a simple illness. It can be deadly. Each bout meant time off the road. Each one meant canceled shows and worried fans. And each one chipped away a little more at the strength of those already damaged lungs. The pattern repeated through the years. Illness, recovery, return, illness, recovery, return. Again and again, his body knocked him down, and again, he climbed back up. The breathing problems were not limited to disease. Even the air itself became an enemy at times. Performing at high altitude caused him trouble. The thin air punishing his weakened lungs. There were tour stoppages across the 2010s, dates canceled, shows cut. Short, doctors ordering rest. The road that had been his life kept getting interrupted by the failures of his own body. For fans, every cancellation brought the same cold fear. Was this the end? Each time. The answer was no, but the cancellations were real, and they were piling up. His body was sending signals, no one could ignore it. It was not only his lungs that betrayed him. In 2004, Willie underwent carpal tunnel surgery. For most people, that is a manageable problem. For a guitarist, it strikes at the heart of everything. His hands were his craft. The fingers that flew across the strings of his famous guitar, the ones that built a sound no one could copy, were now under the knife. He came through it. He kept playing. But it was one more reminder that time and wear were closing in from every direction. Lungs, hands, breath, the instrument of his body was wearing out. Around 2015, he reached for something more drastic. Willie underwent stem cell therapy to try to help his failing lungs. It was a sign of how serious his breathing troubles had become. This was not a small adjustment. This was a man searching for any way to keep his lungs working, to keep the breath flowing, to keep the music alive against a disease that only moves one direction. He was willing to try almost anything to stay. On that stage, the drive to keep performing pushed him toward treatments many men his age would never consider. But the hardest test of his lungs was still ahead. In 2022, a new threat arrived, a virus that had killed millions around the world, and that was especially deadly. For the old, and for those with weak lungs, Willie was both. He caught COVID-19 and his case was severe. For a man in his late 80s with emphysema and a history of collapsed lungs, this was a genuine fight for his life. This was the kind of illness that ends people far younger and far healthier than Willie. By every measure, he was among the most vulnerable people the virus could find, and yet he survived. He was treated, he fought through it, and he came out the other side. Later that same year, he was back doing what he always did, performing. Stop and consider what that took. An old man with the weakest possible lungs beating a virus designed to attack exactly that weakness. It should not have been possible for Willie. It simply was. But 2022 took something from him too, because that was also the year he lost the woman at the piano. The same year he survived COVID, his sister Bobby was gone. Survival and grief arriving together the way they always did, for him. So count them up. A collapsed lung in 1981, years of emphysema, repeated pneumonia, altitude crises, carpal tunnel surgery, stem cell therapy, a severe case of COVID that should have killed him. Any one of these could, the music, breathe. She was not a hired hand, she was blood. When Willie looked to his side on stage, he saw the same face that had watched him grow up in a tiny Texas town. That kind of bond does not exist in most bands. Players come and go. But Bobby had been there since the beginning, and everyone assumed she always would be. Their music together had a feel no one could copy. It was built on a lifetime of trust. She knew where he was going before he got there. When he stretched a note, she followed. When he wandered off the melody, she held the floor steady beneath him. They played like two halves of one person. That sound was the heartbeat of his band for generations of fans. And then, one day, that heartbeat simply stopped. In March of 2022, Bobby Nelson died. She was 86 years old. The sister who had been beside him for nearly 9 decades was suddenly gone. For Willie, this was not just the loss of a bandmate, it was the loss of the last witness to where he came from, the only person who remembered the very start. The piano beside him fell silent. The seat that had been filled for over 60 years was empty, and he still had to walk out and perform. He did not stop. He went back on the road and kept playing the songs they had played together. But everyone who watched closely could feel the difference. Willie has spoken about it since. He says he still feels her there with him when he plays. He still senses her presence in the music, as if she never fully left. That is the kind of grief that does not make a loud headline. It does not fit a quick video. It is too deep, too quiet, and far too real. And here's what makes it heavier. Bobby was not the only empty chair. By the time she passed, Willie had already buried most of the people who built his world. His band had been a family for half a century. The same faces, the same bus, the same long miles. One by one, those faces began to disappear. The man who once stood in a crowd of brothers now found himself surrounded by ghosts, and the most famous of those brothers had their own goodbyes. Go back to the Highwaymen, 4 legends who joined forces and became something bigger than any one of them. Waylon Jennings, Johnny Cash, Kris Kristofferson, and Willie. Waylon died in 2002. The wild heart of the group, the man Willie fought and loved like a brother, was gone first. A year later, Johnny Cash followed him. The man in black went quiet. And just like that, half of the Highwaymen had left the stage forever. For 2 decades, Willie and Kris carried what was left. 2 old outlaws holding the memory of the other 2. As long as they both stood, the Highwaymen were not entirely gone. Then the last pillar fell. In 2024, Kris Kristofferson died, the final brother, the last man who had stood in that line beside Willie. With Chris gone, the math became brutally simple. Of the 4 highwaymen, only one was left, and that one was Willie. He spoke about Chris with a tenderness he rarely shows. He called him a great songwriter and a great friend. He said they made a lot of music and had a lot of fun together. Then came the words that stayed with everyone who heard them. That was a sad time. From a man who keeps his pain hidden. That was a door cracked open, but it was his next reflection that cut the deepest. Because he turned from grieving one friend to facing what it meant to be the only one left. He looked back at the whole journey. Waylon and Chris and John and himself. All of them working together as the highwaymen, 4 voices that became one. And then he said it plainly, I am the only one left. And that's just not funny. No drama, no self-pity. Just the cold truth of a man standing alone. Think about what that sentence carries. Every friend who understood his world is gone. Every brother who shared that stage is silent. He is the last voice still singing their songs. The losses did not stop at the famous names. His own band, the people on his bus, had been falling away too. The family he built on the road kept shrinking. Paul English, his longtime drummer, was one of his oldest and most trusted friends. He was the man Willie wrote songs about, the loyal partner through decades of touring. When players like Paul passed, Willie lost more than musicians. He lost the men who knew the road as he knew it. The circle around him grew smaller every year. So picture the stage now. A man at 93 playing the same songs in front of the same kind of crowds. But the people who once stood beside him are gone. The brothers from the highwaymen, the sister at the piano, the drummer who never missed a beat, the friends who shared 1,000 nights on the highway. He carries all of them onto that stage every single night. Each empty chair has a name. Each name is a goodbye he had to live through. And yet the deepest wound of all was still to come. Because losing friends is one kind of pain. Losing the brothers of your youth is another. But there is a grief that sits below all of it. A grief reserved for parents. Willie Nelson is a father. Over his long life, he had 8 children. They were the pride of everything he built, the legacy he hoped would outlast him. A parent is never meant to bury a child. It breaks the natural order of things. And Willie has had to do it more than once. The first of these losses came in the same year that should have been one of his happiest. 1991, the year he married Annie, the woman still by his side today. In that very same year, his son Billy died. A father lost his boy. And the timing made the joy and the grief impossible to separate. There is no way to soften a loss like that. It is the kind of wound that never fully closes. Willie carried it quietly, the way he carries most of his deepest pain. He rarely speaks about it in detail. Some grief is too private, even for a man who has lived his whole life in public. But those who know him understand it shaped him forever. A loss like this does not pass. It becomes part of a person. It sits behind the eyes during every quiet moment, every empty hotel room, every long drive between shows. For more than 30 years, Willie has carried that absence. And it was not the only child he would have to mourn. Decades later, the pain returned. In 2017, his daughter Renee died. Once again, a father stood at the grave of his own child. By then, Willie was in his 80s. He had already buried friends, bandmates, his sister soon to come, and one son. Now another piece of his family was gone. Most people will never know that kind of loss even once. Willie has lived through it twice as a father. 2 children gone before him. 2 goodbyes no parent should ever face. Stack it all together, and the weight becomes almost impossible to hold. A son, a daughter, a sister, a drummer, 3 highwaymen brothers, a lifetime of funerals. This is what sat behind the gentle smile fans saw at 93. Not just a frail body, not just tired lungs, but a heart that had said goodbye more times than anyone should. And still he walked onto the stage. Still he picked up the guitar. Still he sang. The question is how? How does a man carry this much loss and keep standing? The answer is not simple, and it does not come yet. Because to understand how Willie survived this much grief, you have to understand what he survived before it. There was a time when the losses were not about death at all. There was a time when Willie lost his home, his savings, and nearly his name, all in a single blow. He was already famous when it happened, already a legend. And that made the fall even harder to watch. It came without warning, the way the worst things do. One day he was one of the biggest stars in America. The next, the most powerful force in the country was taking everything he owned. His ranch, his instruments, his money, his memories packed into boxes and marked for sale. They came for all of it, and they nearly succeeded. So before we learn how he kept singing through so much death, we have to go back to the day the music almost ended for a very different reason. The day the government came to collect. The year was 1990. Willie Nelson was one of the most famous musicians alive. He had spent decades at the top, selling records, filling arenas, living the dream he had chased since boyhood. Then the letter came. It was not from a fan, it was not from a record label. It was from the Internal Revenue Service, the most feared agency in the country. The number on the page was staggering. The government said Willie Nelson owed them a fortune, and they had come to collect every last cent. The amount was almost impossible to believe. The IRS claimed Willie owed around $32 million. For most people, that figure belongs in a movie, not a real life. This was not a small mistake on a tax form. This was a mountain of debt, large enough to bury almost anyone, and it landed on a man who thought he had done everything right. How does one of the biggest stars in America suddenly owe a sum like that? The answer was not greed. It was a trap he never saw coming. To understand the fall, you have to look back at the 1980s. Willie was making serious money, and like many wealthy people, he was told to shelter it from taxes. He put his money into tax shelters, investments designed to lower what he owed. They were sold to him as smart and legal ways to protect his fortune. He trusted the advice. He signed where he was told to sign. He believed the people handling his money knew exactly what they were doing. They did not. The shelters fell apart under the eyes of the government. The IRS ruled them invalid. And suddenly, all those years of saved taxes came crashing back as debt. On top of the unpaid taxes came penalties. On top of the penalties came interest. The original figure swelled into that monstrous $32 million number. Willie had not stolen anything. He had not hidden money in secret accounts. He had followed bad advice, and now he was about to pay for it in the most public way imaginable. The IRS did not just send bills, they took action. In 1990, they began to seize his assets. They reached into his life and started taking things away. This was not a quiet legal matter handled behind closed doors. This was the government walking in and claiming the property of a beloved American icon. His homes, his land, his belongings, item by item, the things Willie had worked his whole life for were marked as the property of the United States. Then came the part that stung the most. They did not just take his things, they put them up for auction. They sold the pieces of his life to the highest bidder. Imagine watching strangers bid on your home, on your ranch, on the things you spent 50 years building. Willie had to live through exactly that in front of the entire world. It was a public humiliation few stars ever face. The rebel who beat the Nashville system was now being stripped bare by the most powerful agency in the land. And yet, in the middle of this disaster, something remarkable happened. The fans came. The people who loved Willie refused to let the story end in total ruin. At some of the auctions, friends and supporters bought his belongings and gave them back to him. People stepped in to protect what they could. It was proof of something. The IRS could never seize the loyalty of the people. They could take his land, but they could not take the love that came with his name. Still, the debt remained. $32 million does not vanish because fans show kindness. Willie needed a way to fight back, and he found one in the only weapon he had ever trusted, his music. If the world wanted to take his money, then he would make money the only way he knew how. He would record his way out of the hole. What he created next was unlike anything in music history. It was bold, strange, and pure Willie. And it turned his disaster into one of the great comeback stories of his life. In 1992, he released an album with a title that said everything. The IRS Tapes, Who'll Buy My Memories? The name was a dare, and a joke and a cry for help all at once. The idea was simple and brilliant. The money from the album would go straight to the IRS. Fans could buy the record and help pay down the debt of the man they loved. It was Willie turning his lowest moment into a song instead of hiding from the shame. He put it on the cover and sold it. That was the outlaw spirit at its finest. The album became part of the larger deal that finally ended the nightmare. Through the record, through negotiations, and through payments, Willie chipped away at the mountain. Over time, the debt was settled. The final figure he paid was far smaller than the original $32 million. The crisis that had threatened to erase him slowly came to a close. He had stared down the most powerful financial force in the country and survived. Battered, lighter in the wallet, but still standing. Still Willie. Still singing. Think about what that recovery actually took. Most people would have crumbled. The shame alone would have ended. A smaller man, the debt would have buried him for good. But Willie did not crumble. He treated the disaster the way he treated everything else in his life. He met it head on with a guitar in his hands and a joke on his lips. That refusal to break is the thread that runs through his entire story, through grief, through illness, through ruin. He bends, he aches, but he does not stop. And the IRS battle revealed something else about him. He did not blame the fans, he did not vanish in bitterness, he turned to the people, and the people turned back to him. That bond would matter more and more as the years went on. It would carry him through the losses we have already seen and the ones still ahead. But to understand where that unbreakable spirit came from, you cannot start with the fame. You cannot start with the money you have to go back much further than that. Because the strength that beat the IRS was not born in a recording studio. It was not forged in the glow of stardom. It was built long before any of that existed. It was built in hunger, in dust, in a tiny Texas town during the hardest years America has ever known. In a childhood that should have broken him before he ever began. The man who survived a $32 million debt had survived something far harder first. He had survived being poor, abandoned, and alone in the middle of the Great Depression. That is where the real story begins. Not in the spotlight, but in the dirt. Not in the triumph, but in the struggle that came before everything else. To understand how Willie Nelson kept standing through every loss, every illness, and every blow, you have to meet the boy he once was, the boy from Abbott, Texas. So leave the auctions and the tax letters behind. We are going back to the very beginning, to a small house, a hard road, and the two children who would have to raise themselves where it all began. On April 29, 1933, a boy was born in Abbott, Texas. The country was deep in the Great Depression. Money was scarce. Hope was scarcer. Abbott was a tiny farming town. The kind of place most maps skip over. There was no wealth there, no easy road, no head start waiting for a poor child. Into that hard world came Willie, Hugh Nelson. And almost from the start, life began taking things away from him. He was still a baby when his parents left. His mother and father separated and both moved on. The boy and his older sister were left behind. It fell to their grandparents to raise them too. Old people in a small Texas town, taking in two small children during the worst economic collapse in American history. That was the foundation of Willie's life, not comfort. Not safety, but hardship, hunger, and the early lesson that the people you love can disappear. But his grandparents gave him something money could not buy. They gave him music. In that little house, songs filled the spaces where comfort was missing. His grandparents encouraged it. They put a guitar in his hands. They sat his sister Bobby at the piano. And the two children found the one thing that was truly theirs. Music became their shelter. When the world was cold, and the cupboards were bare, the songs were always there for Willie. That lesson never faded. He started young. He wrote his first songs as a small boy. He played in local bands while still a child, earning a few dollars in the beer joints and dance halls of Texas. By the time most kids were finishing school, Willie already knew what he was. He was a performer, a writer, a man who turned feeling into song. But knowing your gift and getting the world to pay for it are two different things. And the road from a Texas dance hall to fame would be long and full of closed doors. He chased the dream the hard way. He worked odd jobs to survive. He sold encyclopedias. He sold vacuum cleaners. He even worked as a radio disc jockey to keep food on the table. All the while, he kept writing, kept playing, kept believing the songs in his head were worth something, even when no one was buying. Eventually, the only place that mattered for a songwriter called him. The capital of country music, he packed up his talent and headed for Nashville. Nashville should have been the answer. It was the center of the country music world, the place where dreams like his were supposed to come true. Willie arrived with a notebook full of songs that would one day be called classics. He had the talent. He had the words. What he did not have was a system willing to let him be himself. Nashville had a formula, a clean, polished sound, and Willie, with his odd phrasing and rough edges, did not fit the mold. They wanted to sell, so they used him in the way that suited them. They saw a songwriter, not a star. They took his words and handed them to other singers. And what words they were. Willie wrote Crazy, a song that became a massive hit, but it was not Willie who made it famous. It was Patsy Cline. Her version became one of the most beloved songs in American history. Willie had written a masterpiece, yet the spotlight and much of the glory went to someone else. It was a strange kind of success. His songs were everywhere. Other artists were turning his words into hits, but the man behind them stayed in the shadows. He was respected as a writer. He was paid as a writer. But the stage, the fame, the recognition he wanted as a performer kept slipping out of reach. For years, he played by Nashville's rules. For years, it left him boxed in, frustrated, and unfulfilled, until one day he decided he was done playing their game. In the early 1970s, Willie made a choice that changed everything. He turned his back on Nashville. He left the polished machine behind. He headed home to Texas, to Austin, a city with a wild, free music scene that did not care about Nashville's rules. There, he could finally be exactly who he was. He grew out his hair. He grew out his beard. He traded the clean-cut country look for the bandana and the braids. The outlaw was being born. This was the start of the outlaw movement. A rebellion against the slick Nashville sound, a return to something rawer, truer, and freer. Willie was at the heart of it. Alongside other rebels who refused to be tamed, he built a new kind of country music. Music made on his own terms, with his own voice. For the first time, the world was about to hear Willie Nelson exactly as he wanted to be heard. And what they heard would make him a legend. The albums came, and they were unlike anything Nashville would have allowed. In 1973, he released Shotgun Willie. It was the sound of a man finally free. Then came the album that changed his life. In 1975, he released Red-Headed Stranger. It was sparse, strange, and unlike any country record before it. The label was nervous about it. They thought it was too bare, too simple. They were wrong. It became a massive success and turned Willie into a superstar. After decades of struggle, the boy from Abbott had finally arrived, not as someone else's songwriter, but as a star in his own right, on his own terms, in his own voice, the dream he had carried. Since those hungry years in Texas was real at last, the poverty, the closed doors, the years in the shadows, all of it had led to this. But fame does not erase a person's troubles, it often multiplies them. And Willie's personal life was as turbulent as his career was, triumphant. His heart was as restless as his music. Over the course of his life, Willie married 4 times. Each marriage was its own story of love, struggle, and heartbreak. The early years were especially rough. His first marriage was marked by hardship and reported turmoil. Love came hard, and often left harder in those younger days. Through the marriages came children, 8 of them in all. A large and scattered family born across different chapters of a restless and complicated life. Finally, in 1991, he married Annie D'Angelo. She would become the lasting partner the earlier years never gave him. She remains by his side to this day. But that same year brought one of the deepest wounds of his life, the loss of his son. Joy and grief arrived together, the way they so often did for Willie. His personal life was never simple. It was a tangle of love and loss, of new beginnings shadowed by old pain, and his body would carry its own long story of struggle. The roots of his health battles reach back decades too. For much of his life, Willie was Waylon Jennings. His brother in The Highwaymen did not describe a broken man. He described a free one. Waylon called him the only true free spirit he ever met. Not a victim, not a tragedy, a spirit so free that most people could never understand it. That is the first crack. In the sad story, the people closest to Willie did not pity him. They were in awe of him, and the two of them were not gentle friends, they fought like brothers. Willie has described how he and Waylon argued like an old married couple over money and over everything else. But that was the point. You do not fight that hard with someone you do not love. Their bond was loud and stubborn and real, the kind that only comes from years of trust. So when Waylon called Willie a free spirit, it was not a polite compliment. It was the verdict of a man who had seen Willie at his worst and his best and admired him anyway. Then came one of the greatest voices in all of music. Bob Dylan, in a 2025 profile, tried to put Willie into words and admitted he could barely do it. Dylan said it was hard to talk about Willie without saying something stupid because he is so much of everything. He called him indefinable, unfathomable, a man too large to capture. This is not how the world talks about a sad and finished man. This is how it talks about a giant, a force too big. For ordinary words, Dylan reached for image after image to describe him. A poet for everyone who never quite fit in and never cared to. A philosopher, a singer who treats his battered old guitar like the last loyal dog in the universe. It is a portrait full of wonder, not pity. Dylan was not mourning Willie. He was marveling at him. The way you marvel at something rare and impossible when a legend like Bob Dylan struggles to find words big enough. For you, your life is many things, but it is not small, and it is not sad. Look at his 90th birthday in 2023. It was not a quiet, mournful affair. It was a star-studded celebration at the Hollywood Bowl. George Strait sang joyful duets with him. Legends lined up to honor a man they loved. The night was full of music and laughter, not grief. This was the music world, gathering not to say goodbye, but to say thank you, a celebration of a life that had given so much, thrown by the people who received it. Even Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones showed up. The rock and roll survivor came to honor the country outlaw, and what he said captured the whole spirit of Willie's life in a single line. Richards quipped that it was good to be there, good to be anywhere. It was a joke about survival from two men who had both cheated the odds for decades. He performed alongside Willie and Willie's sons, Lucas and Micah, 3 generations of music on one stage. That is not the image of a lonely old man. That is a bonfire surrounded by the people who love him. And those sons are the key to everything, because the empty chairs we mourned earlier were not the whole picture. Willie did not end up alone. He ended up surrounded by his own blood. His sons, Lucas and Micah, perform with him. They share his stage night after night. The same family music that began with Willie and his sister Bobby now lives on through his children. The piano seat went quiet, yes, but the family band did not die with Bobby. It grew, it continued, it passed to the next generation, exactly as Willie always hoped. Think about what that means against everything we have heard. The boy whose parents left him built a family that refuses to leave his side. The losses were real, but so was this. He turned the music. His grandparents gave him into a gift he could pass down from Abbott to the Hollywood Bowl. The same songs, carried by the same blood across 3 generations. That is not the ending of a sad story. That is a circle closing. The shelter music gave a pour. Texas boy is now the shelter he gives his own sons then. There is Annie, his wife since 1991, when the rumors painted her as a tearful woman, caring for a dying husband. She did not play along. She laughed them off. She joked that Willie was Benjamin buttoning her, aging backward, growing younger while she caught up. That is not the voice of a grieving widow in waiting. That is the voice of a partner still teasing the man she loves. After more than 30 years together, the tearful wife of the headlines was a fiction. The real Annie was cracking jokes about how young her husband seemed. At 93, the people selling sorrow had never met the woman they claimed to quote, "She has been beside him through the IRS years, the losses, the illnesses, all of it, and she came out the other side teasing, not weeping." That tells you what the inside of his life actually looks like the closer you get to Willie Nelson. The less the sad story holds. The strangers online saw tragedy. The woman who shares his home saw a man growing younger by the day. Now look at what Willie was actually doing in 2026. Not lying in a hospital, not fading away. He was on the road, again, exactly where he has always belonged. He was preparing for the Outlaw Music Festival tour, with dates rolling out across the country. He was performing with his sons. He was living on his own ranch on his own terms. And he was still making music. He had released new albums in his 90s, a creative output that would exhaust artists half his age. The man was not retiring. He was still creating. He even addressed the rumors himself. He said he was in pretty good shape physically for his age and credited singing and performing as the very thing keeping him strong. Remember his philosophy from the start of this story. Stopping is the danger. The stage is the medicine. At 93, he was still living by it and still proving it true. The grief was real. The losses were real. The health battles were real, but Willie did not see his life as a tragedy. He saw it as a gift. He was still unwrapping one show at a time. So now we can finally answer the question this whole story began with. Did the music legends expose a sad life at 93? No, they did the opposite. They did not expose sorrow. They celebrated a survivor. Waylon saw freedom. Dylan saw greatness. Keith Richards saw a brother. His family saw a man. Still standing, still singing, still theirs. The losses were never the whole story. They were the price of a life lived long enough and large enough to lose that much. You only bury that many people if you outlast them. You only carry that much grief if you loved that deeply. Look back at everything now and it reads differently. The farm aid years were not a man emptying himself. They were a man so full he had something left to give for. 40 years, the body that kept quitting did not quit. It carried him through a collapsed lung, through COVID, through everything, all the way to 93 and another tour. And the empty chairs were never the whole room. The room was still full of sons, of fans, of a wife who teases him, of legends who line up to call him the freest spirit they ever knew. That is the truth. The sad story missed. Willie Nelson at 93 is not a man surrounded by ghosts. He is a man who turned every loss into a song and every goodbye into a reason to keep going. The boy from Abbott, who had nothing built a life so full it took the whole world to mourn its losses with him. And he is still here, still touring, still writing, still chasing the dream that started in a tiny Texas house with his sister at the piano. The legends did not expose a sad life. They revealed a great one. The saddest thing about Willie Nelson is only that someday the music will have to stop, but not yet, not today, not while. He still has a song left to sing. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments which Willie Nelson song means the most to you and why. I read every single one, and if you want more stories like this one, about the legends who lived through everything and somehow kept going, there is another waiting for you right now on the screen. Go ahead and let it play. References: Willie Nelson biography, timeline, IRS crisis, health history, personal life, activism, https://nbikibedial.org, Wikti, Willie N. Nelson. Willie Nelson on Chris Christopherson. That was a sad time. Last Highwayman reflection, https://www.rollingstone.com. Music, news. Willie Nelson remembers. Chris Tofferson 1,235,150,958. Willie Nelson health problems, smoking, emphysema, pneumonia. https://www.nickiswift.com/1,958,126. Willie Nelson health problem. Willie Nelson ignores pleas to slow down. Family urging caution. https://say.news.yo.com. Swill N. Nelson 93 ignores pleas 133,947,131.html. Nearing 93, still chasing dreams, on the road again. https://savingcountrymusic.com. Nearing 93, Willie Nelson is still chasing his dreams. Farm Aid. 40th anniversary, Time 100 Philanthropy, https://time.com/collection Time 100 Philanthropy 2026. Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings' only true free spirit quote, https://www.tiktok.com/classic country music's video 7 quintillion, 552 quadrillion, 924 trillion, 924 trillion, 929 billion, 495 million, 158,046. Bob Dylan on Willie Nelson 2025 profile, https://.sequence.net 2025 12 Willie Nelson Bob Dylan interview quote George Strait duets 90th birthday at the Hollywood Bowl, https://www.latimes.com entertainment arts mere music's music story 2023 4-30 Willie Nelson 90 birthday concert Hollywood Bowl Day 2. Keith Richards at the 90th birthday. Good to be anywhere. https://varieday.com. Will 23 for music muse Will Levine 1,874,507. Outlaw Music Festival Tour 2026 dates, https://blackbirdburstpresents.com's concert Outlaw Music Festival Tour 2026 Willie Nelson Family Spring 2026 tour dates, new music, https://relics.com's news detail Willie Nelson Family announced Spring 2026 tour dates, Rolling Stone Canada 93rd birthday interview. Pretty good shape physically. https://rollingstone.com's Willie Nelson birthday touring interview.